This is part 26 in our series of Wild Harvest Edibles. Thou preparest a table before me. Just a reminder, as you navigate any health challenge, it is always recommended that you partner with a medical practitioner that shares your philosophy of the care of the human body in disease and in health. The information shared in this presentation is meant to educate and improve your wellness toolbox and aid in returning to health if sick and maintaining good health when well. It should not be construed as medical advice, simply as tools that have been successfully used by others in similar situations. As always, investigate and verify any treatment, protocol, or procedure for yourself, not blindly accepting anything without due diligence. Thomas Edison stated that the doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will instruct his patients in the care of the human frame, in diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease. Thomas Edison, it seems, was very far ahead of his time when he spoke these words. It seems that the medical paradigm has moved quite some distance from that sage advice. Today's focus plant for our Wild Harvest Edibles is chickweed, Stellaria media. Media means middle, and one of the key identifying factors of chickweed are, number one, the core thread that you can see in the lower left picture. If you pull the stem apart, there is a white thread that is evident in the center, as well as the single line of hairs that runs up the exterior of the stem along its entire length of the stem. So look for that line of short bristly hairs. Probably would need a magnifying glass to see that, as well as when you separate the stem, you'll see that core thread. It's often used as chicken food, hence the name chickweed. Another reason for the name of chickweed is the crest-like ridge of hair that I just mentioned as an identifying feature of chickweed. It's been naturalized. It's a very common weed, and it grows as an annual. It does produce lots and lots of seeds, flowers through the winter, and those seeds are released places where it grows, where I'm aware of. It can grow in thick mats and cover large areas. In other places, you'll find it in just small clusters. The flowers are star-like with very deep petals that have two petals associated with them and a very deep groove. And the leaves are oval and cup-shaped, as you can see, with a nice little tip at the end. And the sepals of the flowers are green. From an edibility standpoint, you can just eat the entire leaves, stems, and flowers. The roots are not considered edible, but they're not considered dangerous either. And you're not going. It's more for the herb portion of the flower or the plant itself. So you can eat it cooked or raw. It has a very mild flavor, which makes it very palatable, and is very easy to use in a raw form. It's a great addition to salads. You can use it as like sprouts in a sandwich or in wraps. So it has that size of a sprout, so it would be very easy to use as a substitute for a sprout. It has a very rich in a variety of different nutrients. It's very rich in copper, which is a micronutrient, and phosphorus. Calcium is highly present in chickweed, as well as potassium. So potassium and calcium are both key minerals that are used by the body. Copper is used in micro amounts. Phosphorus is important. And vitamin C. It tends to grow well through the winter, which is typically the time of year when vitamin C is less available because other greens are less available. So in that regard, chickweed is a valuable resource for edibility throughout the winter. Scurvy is a vitamin C deficiency disease that chickweed would help to abate because of the presence of vitamin C. Essentially, scurvy is a connective tissue disorder that is very debilitating and was called, the British sailors were called limeys because they would often, sailors in general, often at sea would have a lack of fresh food and for months on end and end up with scurvy as a vitamin C deficiency syndrome and disease. Their skin would become loose and very painful because the connective tissue would break down. But when they were able to have access to limes or citrus, which were a good traveling source of vitamin C that could be stored aboard ship, then they could abate or prevent and cure scurvy. It turns out that chickweed is a very prolific garden weed and can create carpets of the weeds. And the seeds spread just everywhere. For harvesting chickweed, just grab a handful of the nice fresh chickweed leaves and just cut them off at the bottom with scissors. And you can see here a nice big handful of chickweed. Just put those in a sandwich, toss them in a pot and boil them, put them in a salad. The other thing you can do with them is dry them. So put them in a dehydrator or in a nice solar dehydrator. Basically a greenhouse with a tray that can heat up well. And then you could use them in a dry form at a future time when it's not growing prolifically. So that would be the most hardy way to use it for a long-term medicinal usage, which we'll talk about next. So Hippocrates said a long time ago, let food be your medicine, and let your medicine be your food. And that is the goal of maintaining health, is to eat things that are conducive to good health, that support good health, that build us up and don't break us down. So much of today's standard American diet, the acronym is SAD, is that it is made up and comprised primarily of things that break down the body or don't support proper repair, nutrition, and support of the human body. They're essentially the merchandise of this world, the medicinal, not medicinal, but merchandise, edible food-like substances. There's a saying that if you want to eat healthfully, you would eat the food that your grandmother did. Now, people are getting younger and there's more edible food-like substances available, so maybe we should push that back to great-grandmother in this respect. But a whole food, plant-based diet has been shown over and over and over again to be restorative, preventative, and reparative in all aspects. In fact, the British Medical Journal recently came out with some research of medical professionals who were in direct contact with, in particular in this day and age, COVID patients on their wards, and found that those who had a whole foods plant-based diet were approximately 75% less likely than baseline to contract COVID-like symptoms or COVID at all. On the other hand, if a whole foods plant-based diet included fish in their diet, which many people who are vegetarians or whole foods advocates don't consider fish meat for some odd reason. However, they are animal protein and have the same deleterious effects, in fact, maybe more so than others because of the heavy metals that are present in most fish species today. But they found that being a whole foods plant-based diet advocate, but including fish in their diet, that they found a 40 or 53% approximately reduction in their chances, less risk of contracting COVID from their patients that they were assisting. And mind you that these nurses and doctors were actually fully protected in their work environment with personal protective equipment. On the other hand, they found that those following a ketogenic diet, that is low carbohydrates, low on the fresh plant food end of the spectrum, and high on the animal protein end of the spectrum, the typical ketogenic diet, we had a 48% increased risk from baseline. So those are pretty telling statistics as far as the resistance to disease that whole food, plant-based diet advocates and followers enjoy. So from a medicinal standpoint, chickweed, as our example today, in conjunction with arthritis pain, can be used in a tea or tincture form that can help to minimize joint pain. Essentially, it is an anti-inflammatory, so it relieves the inflammation and the pain associated with arthritis. Arthritis is simply, itis is always an inflammation, and arthro refers to joints. So arthritis is joint pain, but there's different sources of that. They can be osteoarthritis, which is essentially bone-on-bone kind of contact. There's just general arthritis, which is joint pain that may not be bone-based, but definitely inflammation-based. But then there's also rheumatoid arthritis, which is actually an attack of the joint in an autoimmune kind of way, which tends to kind of wax and wane with intensity based on various circumstances that the individual may be a part of. My wife had a dear friend who has since passed away, who had very debilitating rheumatoid arthritis. She'd been a client of hers as a physical therapist. Her joints were essentially eaten away in her fingers, but they had the most amazing disposition of people that I've met. Despite this condition, she was able to be mobile in the sense that she had a wheelchair that she was able to navigate with, but the joints of her fingers were most deformed and destroyed, as well as the fingers or the joints of her toes. It's a very debilitating disease. But chickweed can be beneficial. It can actually be added, a strong tea can be added to a bath. So a warm bath and soaked in can help arthritis pain, particularly those pains that are focused on the knees and feet. But I'm sure that the hands would also be benefited by that in a bath that had a strong tea added to it. So chickweed is also beneficial in conjunction with rashes. You can make a poultice of the moist or crushed chickweed leaves, which helps to relieve the pain and itching of roseola. Roseola is an itchy rash that's typically seen in children. It's not often seen, but that's where it is seen most often. And it's basically derived from, and the disease process is instigated by 2 types of herpes virus. So it's basically lots of itchy dots all over the child's body, torso, face, arms, but it's very, very itchy, and it's just a kind of a body-wide rash. So bathing again in a bath that has had strong chickweed tea added to it can be helpful in relieving the itching and the pain associated with it. So a strong tea would essentially just be a tea made from a large handful, like we see here, of chickweed, or a tea that has had more chickweed added to it and been rewarmed and re-steeped in additional amounts of fresh chickweed. So double strength or more chickweed tea, and then add that to the bath water. Another place where chickweed is beneficial is in helping to minimize nerve pain. So you can use it as a poultice, again, using the leaves that have been moistened, and just adhere it to, wrap it on with some Coflex type wrap or gauze or cloth, or you can be added to a salve. So that could be a beeswax salve or other type of salve that you would make, that you would add the chickweed tea or tincture to. So it helps to relieve the pain and tingling with surface nerve misfiring. Also, it can aid in constipation and digestive calming and issues. So chickweed tea can be helpful for constipation. However, you do need to not be overly excessive in its usage, because it can also function as a purgative. So purgative is something that has strongly laxative effects, so you could end up on the other end of the spectrum if it was used in excess. So it also functions as a painkiller, particularly as a digestive analgesic. So in the GI tract, it would aid in reducing pain that might be found there. So while it reduces the pain, it's not going to actually mitigate or take away the actual cause of the pain. So there still needs to be some work done and some herbs used in delineating what the pain is sourcing from and helping to eliminate that source. So we talked about skin a little bit already with rosalia, but it can also be used for other things like dermatitis, which is inflammation of the skin, eczema, hives, and even shingles. So shingles is a chickenpox varicella virus that is following a nerve pathway typically seen in adults. It can be very painful, but chickweed is useful in helping to abate those skin irritations. So again, a poultice or a salve of the chickweed can aid in shingles, hives, eczema, or dermatitis. It can also be helpful in the pain that is derived from varicose veins. So use a tea, again, in bath water to treat areas that might be affected in a larger area than a simple poultice could address easily. It's also good as a blood purifier and used as a detoxification agent. So if you have some kind of toxin that has been ingested, you can use the chickweed tea to help to detoxify that, so it draws the poisons out of the body. In cases of poisoning, it can be used in things like tetanus or other ways that pathogens have entered the body through wounds. It could also be useful for other types of poisoning as well. Here's some great pictures of chickweed in a garden. Just the pretty little flowers gives you an idea of the size in this gardener's hand. So making a poultice, you can use a 1:1:1 ratio of chickweed. So mashed chickweed, the bruised chickweed, along with ground up ginger root and raw honey. So blend that mixture into a smooth paste and then apply that to the wound in the area that's surrounding the wound. So for something like tetanus or another wound that may be infected. So cover the poultice and then replace that poultice every 6 hours. So this can be drawing out the poisons, and you don't want to keep that poison in contact with the skin because it could end up causing additional issues. So remove that, replace it every 6 hours. Also take that internally as a tea. You can use a dry tea or a fresh tea. Again, you can preserve chickweed for future use by dehydrating it and then saving it and using it, powdering it for use in a tea or other poultices if the fresh chickweed is not available. So I've typically seen chickweed growing most prolifically during the time of the year, kind of fall now and in through winter and early spring, depending on your gardening area. The weeds can kind of wax and wane depending on how you manage your garden. This year in the garden space that I have chickweed typically growing in, I did not see chickweed growing, and I think it was overshadowed by larger plants that were growing there. We planted carrots one year, and chickweed was just overwhelming. We managed to have really nice carrots that year, but there was significant weeding that needed to take place. Chickweed was the primary culprit. So it's also beneficial for use on boils, the sores that are derived from herpes, and other venereal diseases. So from a medical mission standpoint, if you were to encounter someone that had some of these sourced skin eruptions, you could help them, as well as sharing the truths of the Bible with them. As you share God's love with them, you can share His healing attributes that come through the plants that He's provided for us in nature. So you can use chickweed both internally and externally. For harvesting, it's encouraged that you do an early morning harvest. Many things are more chemically intense if they're harvested early in the course of the day. Sometimes those things can release their chemical constituents out into the air around them. So early morning is the best time, as well as late evening. It can also be a good time to harvest your chickweed. Use the upper branches, and you can use it again to use fresh or dry it and dehydrate it for future use. So some people may be allergic to chickweed. Otherwise, it's considered safe. People can be allergic to anything on the planet. So just be cautious whenever you're trying something brand new, that the person who's using it doesn't have an allergic reaction to it. Nursing and pregnant women should check in with their healthcare professional before utilizing it. I don't know of any particular contraindications for pregnant women, but it would be anyone who's pregnant or nursing to be very careful with their diet, because it can have a direct effect on their child, either the growing child in the womb or the nursing child consuming the milk that's produced by the mother. Turns out that most mothers, whether they are very health conscious or not, tend to be the healthiest during the time that they have their children nursing or in the womb, because there is greater consideration for their body, because there is a general knowledge that it does affect the baby. So in general, that's true, but there can always be improvements in that arena. So here's a recipe for chickweed decoction, which essentially is a way of making the tea. It's a very excellent internal cleanser and a blood purifier and a washing agent. So using fresh chickweed. So 1 cup of fresh chickweed and 1 pint of water. Bring that water to a boil, then add the chickweed to the water. Reduce your heat and simmer for 15 minutes on the stovetop, and then cool it. Strain it and use it internally as a tea. Drink that. 1 to 2 ounces is adequate, 30 to 40 milliliters, or use it externally. So you're not going to be drinking a cup of tea, because that's going to be like 8 ounces or so. You're going to be using much less, and you could put that decoction, save that aside, and use that in that quantity by putting it into a larger quantity of hot water. For example, if you wanted a hot drink, or into cold water for just a diluted tea of the decoction. So the decoction is essentially a longer extraction process than you would do with a longer heat application than you would do with just a simple infusion of a tea. So again, you could use that with dry chickweed if that was all you had, and it would have some benefit to it, but this is with the fresh chickweed. So in closing, here are some close-up pictures of chickweed. There's a nice, on the lower left, a nice mat of chickweed that have had some of the fresh chickweed removed from it and put in a colander ready for rinsing. The upper left, nice picture of the flowers, and you can see the hairs that are standing out on the one side, so it's not fuzzy all the way around, it's just a ridge down the stem line. It's an identifying feature. Again, the core, when you'd separate the stem, of a thread running down the middle, another key identifying feature. And it's a nice, very green, mild tasting herb that is very helpful in a lot of different ways, as well as highly edible. Again, it can have purgative effects if used in excess, the tea in particular. So do be careful, as it does have those laxative qualities. And then here's a nice little cluster that is found in a non-gardening application. So it can grow in places that are widely diverse, but typically have a good nutrient profile associated with it. And that is looking at the herb that we know as chickweed.